So what you're about to hear is a Patreon show that was released back on September 3rd of this year, and I was looking for one that I could make public, and one of my patrons suggested this one, and I think it's as good as any to make public, so you get an idea of what you would get on a regular basis if you become a patron and help support the show. This is a conversation I had with Tim Renner after we had talked about his Where the Footprints End Volume 1 book, and it just kind of went where it went. So if you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link, and you get a number of shows like this over the course of the month for as little as $3. So this is a Patreon segment with Mr. Timothy Renner. Hi, Tim.
Hello.
So I had a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about, and let's see. I had made a note here. Your book definitely spawned some interesting things in my brain. Okay, so one of the things, I don't know which chapter it was. You guys,
did you lick the pages?
Did I lick the pages?
Yeah.
A little, not all of them.
That'll definitely fire your brain for sure. The special ink we use.
Ah, that's what that was. So, like, there's like the missing time thing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There was I don't know if it was in one of your chapters or Josh's chapters, but a bunch of like someone was out and they saw a bunch of things crawling toward them, like little hairy things crawling toward them, and then they just have this missing time experience. And what always sticks with me when it comes to our experience of time is something that Seth said, which was time moves based on how much our brain can process at one point. Hence why time flies when you're busy or doing something you enjoy, whereas if you're just sitting around, time just seems to slow to a crawl.
Mm-hmm.
It's like processing speed of time is like our brain's processing speed. So is it possible when we're having one of these encounters, it is more than our brain can deal with processing-wise, and it's making time move much, much faster?
It's quite possible. These are oftentimes very shocking events for people. Very, upsetting sometimes life-changing, sometimes amazing. But they're certainly not common experiences. So, absolutely that could be happening.
And that it just struck me when I heard that, and I'm thinking, like, and it might get to a point where our brain's processor just can't handle it.
Yeah.
And that might be where there's a jump, or just like a dream, where we're entering a different state of consciousness at that point. That we aren't necessarily going to be able to recall clearly when we get back to a normal consciousness. Right.
Yeah. Wes from Sasquatch Chronicles, his account with his brother, he will tell you outright that they shouldn't have gotten home. Like, they got home at like 4 a.m. or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, there's no way. He's like, we were only there for a little while, and then we came home like hours late. And, to me, that makes me believe his account even more. You know what I mean? Like the fact that he has that like little weird detail that they throw in there, because otherwise it's his account. Basically, they saw a bunch of creatures, several, like at one time, and got growled at, I believe, and they were in their car and saw a bunch of creatures on top of a mountain, I think in Washington State, and very frightening account. But that missing time element that he added to it, to me, that's a very convincing thing to me that he puts that in there. And I think a lot of flesh and blood guys would say, no, that makes it less believable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When you were doing the chapter on the invisible Bigfoot, it might have been Josh, I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure you know plenty about invisible Bigfoot.
Yeah.
My initial objection to the invisible Bigfoot thing from the beginning was, okay, we don't know if this thing exists, and yet we're ascribing other things that we don't see in nature to it, because we don't see things. I mean, we see things that can blend into the background, but that's different from invisible.
Right.
Chameleons blend into their background. They're essentially invisible, but they're not actually invisible.
Mm-hmm.
They're just melding into, what's around them. And I think you even talk about like Bigfoot turning into tree stumps that you'll cover in the next volume.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Isn't the picture on the back of your first book something like that? Like a tree stump that wasn't there?
I mean, it certainly looks kind of like that. Yeah. People have said it looks like a dog demon and all this other stuff. I don't know what it was. Like I said, the only thing I can tell you is I took that photo. It looked weird. It looked like something, something with eyes and features. And I went back and there's nothing there, in the place where I took that photo. So, what is, I don't know what it is. It does. If there was a stump there, I could have believed it was a stump. You know what I mean?
Right, but there was no stump
when
there.
I went back to take the pictures, there's nothing there. So I cannot tell you.
When I read that book the first time, because you mentioned it in the book, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay, because I remember the first time, I couldn't remember if you were just talking about it or if it was in the book. But I remember thinking, okay, this guy thinks correctly about this stuff. You're not denying it, but you're not just going with, that's what it is. It's Bigfoot,
Right. Well, that picture sells that book, by the way, on the back cover.
Really?
People pick it up, and I'll see them look at it, and they'll turn over, and they'll see that back, and they go, ooh, and then they buy it. So
nice.
Yeah. There was because I wasn't sure, because it's another. I mean, not a nothing picture, but to me, it's not going to convince anybody of anything.
Yeah.
It's like what I talk about, like maybe footprints. I've never found a good, clear Bigfoot footprint. Never, where you can actually see toes and stuff. I found a few maybe footprints where you look at them and go, maybe that's a footprint. I mean, they're in interesting areas and they seem like they're, that's what they are, but they're not going to convince anybody of anything. That picture's the same way. It's like, if you're a skeptic, that picture's not going to convince you of anything. But if you want to see something there, I guess you're going to see it there. You know what I mean? So, people are, I guess, open to the idea of this stuff. That picture does tend to sell that book.
Yeah, well, that picture is a qualified unknown.
Yeah. That much we can say, sure.
It's anomalous in some way, until you can figure out a way to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitive and provable.
And the funny thing is, now I don't even bother taking pictures.
Really?
I just don't think you can capture this stuff on camera, so I don't even bother. I should. I was out with Chad last night. We were doing a haunted bridge thing, and he got some very compelling pictures of like lights and stuff that we weren't seeing with our naked eye, that were showing on his phone. Pretty neat stuff, but I just never think to pull out my camera. I always feel like I'm much more interested in recording audio.
Oh, okay. So the curse of Bigfoot was not something I was fully aware of before reading this book.
Yeah.
And you're talking about people who have Bigfoot encounters and then have incredibly bad luck or die shortly afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And this immediately brought to mind that whole mechanism idea that time and stuff does not work the way we think it does. So again, if these people are experiencing what they're experiencing because something bad is coming, and their knowledge of that, their sort of unconscious knowledge of that in the past is generating the energy that these things need to exist, then a curse of Bigfoot makes sense. Right.
Yeah. In the same way, the Mothman as a herald of doom,
Right. It's just, again, it's the event in the future that's generating the energy in the past. It's not precognitive. It's just that time doesn't work in that direction all the time.
Right.
So big emotional thing is happening in the future. That big emotional thing sends information backwards. We pick up that information unconsciously, and it just becomes stress. It becomes poltergeist energy to some people, and then something like this manifests.
Now, we've talked about the time theory before, and I know, like, you don't mind talking about it. In fact, you said you kind of want to talk about it because you're not sure when you're going to actually get it down in a book.
Right.
Have you thought in your way, so what we're talking about is linear time, which is how most people conceive of time, versus nonlinear time,
right,
generally speaking.
Yeah.
Have you thought like of a visual model of what your concept is?
I don't know how to visually model that.
So here's the way I was thinking, like, because I don't believe time is linear. I think we organize it that way so we don't go insane, basically.
Yeah, right. So things have meaning.
Right. So someone, and I forget who, this is not original, but I read this somewhere. They said instead of a line, picture a ribbon that is folded back on itself again and again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And where the ribbon touches, are like thin spots or where things could bleed through. So that's one way I was thinking about it. The other way I was thinking about it is like, maybe it's not a ribbon at all. Maybe it's a big tangled ball of string.
Yeah.
Just all, complete chaos. I wonder if you had a visual idea, like how you would go with it. Just into it, we don't know, but just intuitively what your thought is.
I think the way I think about it is being in a lake. And certain events make bigger splashes than others. I mean, because it's also a way of looking at free will. Because you're going to be drawn toward those things that are making the bigger splashes.
Okay.
So if it's just in a different part of the lake, which happens to be our future. So the bridge collapse and the Mothman incident, huge rock gets dropped in the lake for those people.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get hit with the waves of it in the past, which creates this whole Mothman thing out of poltergeist energy and everything else, and it also draws them in that direction.
Maybe it's because I'm a visual artist, but to me, when you give a metaphor like that helps me understand it a lot more. Like you know what I mean? Like I got it before. I got what you were talking about. But to me, that makes it much more, easy to understand when you give a visual like that. So I enjoy that model, I'll say.
That's good to know, actually.
What's that?
I said that's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, as you're thinking about like going forward, putting in a book or something, like that might be useful.
So that, that when I hear things like Bigfoot curse, I think, okay, so when you have weird stuff happening right before something bad happens or shortly before something bad happens, and particularly things that are going to affect someone emotionally, that's where I think, that comes into play.
Yeah, I mean, and this could apply well to like things like the Banshee, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Same kind of thing,
Yeah, and I think the Banshee is a really good example of it because the people who are experiencing the Banshee are usually of the same bloodline, which means they might have the same predilection toward either generating poltergeist energy or the way they perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
Just the same way a culture would perceive something a similar way.
Right.
So that's why they're not, they get a woman in white, for instance, as the Banshee. But a lot of times with the Banshee, you don't get a physical apparition. Every once in a while you do, but a lot of times it's audio. It's poltergeist activity.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that struck me when I was reading The Invisible Bigfoot, let's go back to that, is some of the stuff that happened to me in the Potter's Field on the cliff down in Willard. Because there was that thing that was jumping up and down on the other side of the tree line, shaking the tree. And somewhere in here you talk about a Bigfoot shaking a tree. And whatever was shaking the tree had to have been huge. Like I said, I thought it was like a buck, running its horns against it or something because it was a decent-sized tree. Not immovable, but it would take a large animal to move it. And someone, I don't remember who, had suggested, well, maybe it was an invisible Bigfoot. And I kind of just, well, I guess. I mean, I don't know what it was, so I can't say it wasn't. But I'm reading some of the stuff in this book, and, like, there's that, and I walked over there, and there was nothing. And this was also at the same time that I had been reading the Necronomicon. And then my friends wanted to leave immediately. And I went back up there, and there was something moving along the trees up top, knocking huge branches down. But I couldn't see anything. And I'm reading through this, and I'm picking up similar things in here that people have experienced, but not necessarily in that direct way.
Right.
So now I'm wondering if this energy that I encountered was what someone else might have encountered as a Bigfoot.
I mean, there are countless tales. I mean, I can't tell you how many reports I personally have taken of people who talk about being paced in the woods by something. They can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
It's walking right beside them. They can hear it. And it's like, it was in the brush. I couldn't see it. Well, was it? I mean, so a giant, 8 foot tall, 1,000 pound thing is walking next to you and you can't see it. There's a lot of that where these people be paced out of the woods and never see it, never ever see it. It's walking right beside them, they never see it. So very similar kind of thing.
And whatever it was heavy, which again is why I was thinking deer,
mm-hmm.
because they have the hooves that would shake the ground. I mean, if you had a huge buck, if it's running its horns against a tree and its front legs are coming up and down, that's kind of what it sounded and felt like. We could feel the ground shake.
Yeah. I mean, maybe a buck in rut. I mean, most of the time you got, deer generally don't want to be hurt,
Well, right. But I mean, at the time, that was my explanation.
Right.
Yeah, because it had to be something big enough to shake a tree and also shake the ground while it was doing so.
Mm-hmm.
We don't live where there are lots of large animals. We live where there are lots of deer.
Mm-hmm.
Except there was no deer.
Right.
And the other thing, when I was reading your gifting account, I don't know if you've ever heard the story about the gravestone we had up there.
I'm not sure. Refresh my memory.
So we had, like I said, it was basically a potter's field for the insane people who didn't have, not insane people, but the patients of the insane asylum that was there that didn't have families.
Mm-hmm.
And they buried them with a map, but they didn't mark a lot of the graves. They're slowly fixing that now. But at one point there was a little building, and in the building they stored all the gravestones, because sometimes they'd mark them with little metal markers with numbers on them.
That's better than many potter's fields get.
Yeah, so not the whole thing, but some of the older parts had this, and they knocked this building down, and apparently they left a bunch of the metal markers inside. And so after they had knocked the building down, we went up there, and they're like, holy crap, they knocked that whole little building down. And there was a little metal plate tombstone, I forget what the number was, sticking out of the rubble, because they took the rubble from the building and then pushed it into like the gravel driveway. So they just smashed it to pieces and just kind of like graveled it out into the driveway. So I picked this up and I'm like, well, we got a tombstone out of it. I brought it back to the bench we would sit at, and I kind of tucked it away under the bench. Like you wouldn't have been able to find it if you didn't know where it was.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I went up there and I went to pull it out, and it was gone. And I was like, well, who took our gravestone? And it's like, who would take our gravestone? I mean, you couldn't really see this place to begin with, and plus this was in a place you wouldn't have been able to reach. Well, you would have been able to reach, but you wouldn't be able to get it unless you knew it was there.
Right.
So you would have had to been reaching around under the bench. And so as we were leaving, I'm looking over to the right toward the cliff face, or to the cliff drop, and there's the gravestone. And it's sitting in a section cleared out of like branches and debris and leaves and stuff with 3 sticks on each side.
Huh.
The only thing is you couldn't get to it. Like it was thick foliage all the way around it. It was just by chance I could see it through one of the bushes. And I was like, is that the gravestone? And I'm kind of like pushing away branches. And I'm like, that's the gravestone. And my friend's going, how can that even be there? And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to go get it. And he's like, we should leave. And I'm like, no, I'm getting my gravestone. And of course, it's pre-cell phones or stuff where I could have taken a picture. But I took it, and I walked back over to the bench, and I said, this is ours. Just leave this here. And I tucked it away, and it was there from then on. I have it somewhere, but I can't find the thing. But, like with the gifting.
Do you have it?
Well, that's what I'm honestly wondering at this point. And there's a lot of places I could have put it just to get it out of the way, because it's not like something we needed.
Mm-hmm.
But I've looked, and I'm just like, I don't know what happened to this thing. It's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully one day I'll find it and I can get a picture of I have it on video, but I don't have an actual picture of it. But I'm wondering with the gifting thing, if there was some connection there of us leaving it there and then it moving to another location. Or how many times we inadvertently left food or something up there as well.
Well, it's certainly it doesn't always have to be food. It can be something that means something to you, or something that it knows you would notice. I think. I mean, I tell people to be very careful with it, because there are rules expressly put out in folklore about how to do this, and there are reasons why Bigfoot, quote unquote, Bigfoot goes nuts when people break the rules. It's the rules are in the folklore. It tells you how to do it and what to do and what not to do. I've broken the rules, and I've paid the price. I really feel that genuinely myself. But so honestly, like if you want to have interactions with the other, find a place out of the way in the woods and start doing gifting. The number of people that it just works for is it's amazing, and it's an amazing thing, and it's full of wonder. It's also can be, whatever this stuff is, it's capricious, and it can be scary and get weird and get like in my case, I had what I genuinely believe was a rabid raccoon kind of thrown at me for breaking the rules, but it can get ugly. So, be careful, I would say to people, but I can't tell anyone not to do it, because it's so amazing. It's so like when it happens, and when things are changing and things are getting left there, and, you get results, and it's just like, it's wow. It's just, to me anyway, it's just this incredible feeling of wonder that, something is happening, something's going on here. And, so again, it works. I don't know what to say. At least for me, it works, and for other people I know have tried it, it works.
So what are the rules?
So it's kind of laid out in folklore. If you start giving food, don't stop. So that's why I recommend people don't start giving food, because once you start giving food, like, don't stop. Same with alcohol. If you do it, you're going to get results, but you can't stop, because then it's not guaranteed bad stuff's going to happen, but it might. Things might get scary or bad. Don't ask for anything. That's very expressly stated in the folklore. If you do, make sure you take it, because it's a very, very. I think that was my great offense. I asked for a skull. I got a bloody groundhog head, and to me it was gross. I didn't take it.
Right.
And a lot of bad stuff happened afterwards. So in general, I said don't ask for anything. And a piece of advice Brother Richard gave me, which I think is very good, is anything you're given is temporary. Regift it. Like so you don't hang on to that forever. That's take it, look at it, take it home even. Oh wow, this is neat. But then regift it somewhere else, like pass it on. It's meant to be kind of passed on, which I think is I think it's good advice, so you don't get like sort of obsessive about this stuff. Because I know very good friends of mine who are have chests full of things that they feel have been left for them. Little shards of pottery and little tiny broken toys and et cetera, et cetera. And it gets to the point where it's like, is it really healthy to keep all this stuff? What does it get you? What does it mean? Other than like, this is my stuff. This is my stuff that's been left for me. I think it's probably a good thing to like pass it on then, keep it moving.
Interesting. So,
and there's probably other rules I don't know. I haven't read every little bit of folklore in it, but that's the kind of research I've done, and that's what I feel are the sort of rules that go with it.
So when you didn't take the skull, that's when you encountered the raccoon. Yeah,
the next time I went there for any real length of time is when I had the rabbit raccoon, and tons of synchronicity surrounded that day to the point where my head was spinning. Where I couldn't help but feel like there was meaning to the whole event, and I genuinely feel that was my spanking.
Well, I mean, was it, aside from the raccoon attack, which didn't actually harm you, was there anything
because
actually...
my awesome skill with my wizardly powers, I broke its goddamn back.
Fair enough. But was any of the other stuff that happened bad?
No, just unusual. This is like one unusual thing after another. And a lot of it I didn't didn't necessarily like parse out at the time. It was only like later I started looking back and going, whoa, wait, hold on. Like down to, the night before I was doing a podcast with Clint, and he was literally talking about how to catch a raccoon. Some old like Southern folk story about, you put something shiny in a bottle and the raccoon will reach in and not let go. And he'll be in there in the morning, and that's how you catch a raccoon. We were discussing Seth Breedlove, and the park ranger that showed up, his name was Breedlove. I actually asked Seth, how common a name is that? He said, it's a very uncommon name. And I said, well, we were literally talking about your things the night before, and here's the park ranger Breedlove shows up. He's like, Seth's like, I have to be related to him. Like, so I said, well, I'm not making it up. You can look on York County Parks website. There is a ranger Breedlove. Nice. He's the one that showed up. So just this whole like cluster of synchronicities, that surrounded it to the point where, like I said, my head was spinning less from the raccoon attack and more from everything that was going on. I was like, what is going on? Like, what is this? One after another. It was just really, really a strange day.
And I think synchronicities are kind of, they're us manipulating our own reality, even if we don't realize we're doing it sometimes. Or it can be communication from something else. But like I was telling you before we started recording, a friend of mine, one of the guys who does the Metallic Onslaught, kept joking that we should watch this movie called Dunstan Checks In while we did the Metallic Onslaught. And I'd never heard of this movie. I knew nothing about it. And so I got a copy of it and put it in last week, much to their chagrin, because they weren't totally serious. And it's this movie with like Jason Alexander and Faye Dunaway and this chimpanzee that runs wild in a hotel. It's like a family-oriented slapstick comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put it in, and then that was Tuesday. We were recording this on Thursday. Today, the guy who had suggested it, Craig, works at a hotel, and he shoots me a message saying that a guy named Dunstan just checked in. And I said, yeah, I think we made that.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I cannot tell you a time in my life where I've ever met someone named Dunstan.
Right.
It's not a common name. What are the chances that Dunstan literally checked in 2 days after we watched that movie?
Well, for me, it's the kind of thing like the Ghost Box stuff where somebody says, well, that's you influencing it. I'm perfectly okay with that, and it's no less wonderful to me.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Yeah, so if we are creating these synchronicities, I'm perfectly okay with that, and it's no less wonderful to me.
And it might be a mix of things. I mean, it might be the way something tries to communicate to you because it knows how to manipulate that same reality.
Right. Exactly.
I think that reality is a lot more fluid than people give it credit for. Hence the whole imaginal realm and stuff that people like Patrick Harper talk about.
Right. Exactly.
So, I also got, and I'll put it at the end here. I got an EVP, and I don't think I've ever gotten an EVP before.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't trying to get an EVP. So the other night, I don't remember what the date was. It was a Saturday night, and I had gone out to get the mail. It was like 2 a.m. Realized I hadn't gotten the mail that day. And where I live is literally in the middle of nowhere. So it's pitch black out, and there's no moon, and I'm looking at the entire Milky Way above me. And there's tons of insect sounds to the point where it's almost like blaringly loud. It's almost hypnotic at certain levels. And I look up and I see this shooting star, and I went, well, that's pretty cool. And then I still have in mind that eventually I want to do this fiction podcast, and some of that's probably going to be stuff taking place outside. So I said I should record, and I've been doing this occasionally if I get a lot of insect sounds and stuff. I said I should record, some outside noises. That way, if I'm doing it in the winter or something, I will have my own sound. I won't have to go looking, for some free sounds or something on the internet. And so different spots in the yard, I was recording sounds of these insects. And then I walked back past to the back part of the property, and as I come across the area where where anything in the field, in the back field, could see me, I hear this, ah! And it was loud. And I was like, and I just kind of stopped. And I waited a second, didn't hear anything else, and stopped the recording and turned on the flashlight to make sure there wasn't something right there. But I'm pretty sure it was a fox. I've had foxes on the yard before. I've had them scream like that before. Actually, I have pictures of baby foxes that were living under the scary barn. So as I'm looking for this scream, because, again, at the Metallic Onslaught, I relayed that story about the scream and stuff, and one guy goes, so it's on recording, and I said, I should go find it on the recording. So I'm digging through, and I'm listening through the recording. I don't hear the scream, and I'm like, well, where's the scream? And I go back to the recording right before it because I'm not sure how many I made. And as I'm listening, I have this, and I'm standing in pitch darkness between two buildings on my property, and I just hear this, and I'm like, did I just hear that? And I rewind it, and I'm like, yep, it's really, really low. It's almost subsonic. And it sounds like a very deep, almost like throat-singing voice mumbling. And it does it twice. And then I stopped the recording. I didn't hear it. And I think this is the first time in my life I could say I actually got an EVP. I wasn't ghost hunting or anything.
Right.
But it felt very, very strange out that night. And I actually put that down in my notes when I came in, that it just outside had a very odd feeling like there was something there. And then I got that. And there's no meaning to be ascribed to it. I can't make out any words.
Right.
And it's very low. And I'll put that at the end here. Actually, I'll stick it in right here.
Right. Now, so in the main part of this show, we were talking about the White Lady of Pond Bank. When I interviewed that witness there, and I didn't hear this while we were doing the interview. It was March, so this wasn't a bullfrog. It was very cold, early March. Wasn't a bullfrog or anything like that. The whole interview behind us, as we're talking, I did not hear this while we were there. You can hear something just like the whole time we're talking. I captured maybe 2 seconds, maybe a second and a half of it while we stopped talking, and it that kept going. I don't, obviously it was Bigfoot. No, I'm just kidding. Who knows what it was in either case.
So wait, you could or couldn't hear it when you were there?
Could not hear it when we were there.
Okay, all right.
Didn't hear a thing. But I tell you, Chad loves to take me back to Pond Bank at night and make me walk around that damn pond. It's not out in the middle of nowhere. There's a town right there. You can see the lights of the town from the pond. It's, we certainly go into far more remote places than this. I do not like that area at all. And I don't know if it's because, I don't know why. I don't know. I don't think it's because I caught that, whatever it was on tape. I really don't think it's because of that. But something about Pond Bank, just, I'll go almost anywhere. And I will go there, but I have to make myself, especially to walk around the pond at night, I have to make myself do it. Very, very creepy area.
Huh. Okay. And we were talking as well. I don't know if we were talking about this beforehand, but things like owls. And I wonder, it's Mike Clellan's pointed out that the owls he's researching are not always paranormal in any sense. They're regular owls. It's just the oddness of their appearance. Right.
Well, this is, it's like the flannel man accounts or the bunny man accounts. It's like a lot of times these could be just normal people, but they sure are showing up at very interesting times.
Out of place. Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with these owls, the last Site 7 show we did, I was telling you about. I didn't notice this. A listener, I noted at some point we heard, oh look, listen, there's an owl, right when we first got there or something. We heard it, but then as we're playing the audio of us, being there and seeing the lights and stuff. A listener pointed out the owl. You can hear the owl go off every time right before you see the lights. Now we didn't notice that at the time, but listening back, they were correct.
Wow.
That. Every time the owl would go off, and then we'd say, "Oh, look, there's we're seeing the lights or whatever." And we've noticed lately too, a lot of times we'll hear an owl right before we hear something strange or something unexplained or something. And I think they're perfectly natural owls. You know, I don't think they're supernatural owls, but they certainly are going off at an interesting time. And I think this, same applies to your fox there.
Right. Right.
Probably a perfectly natural fox, but it sure did take, choose an interesting time to sound off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder again, if we create some of the reality we're in, we're not necessarily always creating weird stuff.
Right.
We're creating normal stuff in circumstances that are meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not to say that not to say that there's not an empirical reality out there. I think there is, but I think it's very morphic, especially the less people who are involved in its creation at any given time. Hence, when you're alone.
Right. Yeah, that raccoon was a perfectly natural raccoon. Right. There's nothing unnatural about it. What was unnatural was everything that surrounded that. To me, and it's the way I think about it. It's my perception. Ask somebody else, they're like, oh, you just ran into a rabid raccoon in the woods. That's that.
Yeah, well, some people dismiss anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And I think life and meaning and stuff are what you make of it, in a sense. Because you can believe you live in a perfectly rational, materialistic world, and there's nothing else to it. And that's what your life is going to reflect to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I do think it is often, not always, but it is often these people that grasp so tightly to materialism that have these really kind of adverse reactions when they are confronted with the other.
Oh, yeah.
Not always, but often. It's just like, because their world is really shook. They cannot make sense of this at all. Because it doesn't fit. This stuff doesn't fit in that at all.
I'm trying to think of who it was. It might have been Aaron Daba, who had made the comment that our lives aren't like stories, like they don't proceed like stories, but sometimes we create a story around them. And I'm like, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that they do sort of proceed like stories. Some of them have more going on than others. But I think there is some intrinsic meaning there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've often said that, at some point in my life, and I don't know whether that was when I was 5 years old or 15, I can't tell you exactly. I decided that I want to live a life of symbol and meaning. So I'm gonna look for that,
Right.
And to me, it's a more exciting, more interesting, and more fascinating way to live. Even if I'm wrong sometimes, so say
sure.
maybe some of these things are coincidences that I'm saying are synchronicities, but in the end, to me, it's a more satisfying way to live. If it's if I'm wrong about it being a synchronicity and it's just a coincidence, so be it. It certainly made my life more interesting.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If you're wrong, it doesn't take the meaning away from it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think these things are very individualistic. But in noting so many things that have happened in my life, when I look at it in a grander view, it's like, no, there is kind of a story progression here.
Yes, I think the problem with, at least for my part, so when I'm trying to, when I was writing Don't Look Behind You, for instance, I'm finally writing about my experiences.
Right.
These aren't linear. So the raccoon ties in with other stuff, and you have to sort of tell the tale and get the meaning across. You have to go, but wait,
Yeah.
2 days before that, this happened, and if I told you that first, it wouldn't have the same impact as if So I have to go back and forth and jump around, and it's a cobweb. It's not it's not a nice clean line. It's
right.
a big tangled cobweb. So I do find it difficult to sometimes tell the stories in a very linear fashion. I was contacted by one of those storytelling shows on NPR, and they're like, we want you to come on and it's spooky stories or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking to the producer, and I'm telling this story about the gifting and Hex Hollow and the raccoon and seeing weird owls and asking for antlers and getting owl tails, after reading Mike's book, and and how, you know, I never saw an owl before, and I start seeing owls and all this stuff. And the producer, you know, at some point just stops me. She's like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm like, she's like, it's crazy, but I don't know what to do with it. I was like, yeah, it's not a nice linear story. You have to bounce around.
And they want something simple for that audience.
Yeah. They want a nice, clean, linear story, and I get that. Like because they want it, you know, they have a certain amount of time. They need to tell the story in that, and they're probably going to have 3 stories on the show, and they want a nice, clean, linear. And I just couldn't. There's no way to tell it in that way unless I move things around in the way they didn't happen to make it linear. You know what I mean?
I had at some point had someone ask me if I would come on and tell them, you know, they were doing like a scary stories type of show. I don't know what it was for anymore. I don't remember. But some big thing and I said, I don't really have any scary stories. I'm like, not the kind you're looking for anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Because mine are in depth, you know, the things that happen, but they're also not like, I guess the way I tell them is just kind of like, this is what happened.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing this NPR producer was like. She was like, well, you don't seem very scared. I said, well, I wasn't necessarily scared. I was more amazed and kind of like taken aback. And you know, it's hard to say I was scared. You know, she was like, well, I don't know what to do with this. End result is I didn't get on the show, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, well, yeah, I know what you want, but I'm not, you know, it's not necessarily like I was screaming with fear when you know I left a little bottle of liquor and it was gone and then it reappeared again. It's not. I wasn't terrified by that. I was amazed by that.
Right,
you know?
right. And I think too that type of storytelling where I understand why people like to be scared and stuff, but it paints the wrong picture of what this stuff really is. And I think when people do encounter it, they react like how they think they're supposed to react, by being terrified of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which then just leads to more terrifying encounters because it sort of seems to reflect whatever energy it's given.
Yeah, often. Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I think that's another thing that, you know, says it's being co-created by us. There may be an other there, but I think it utilizes the energy that we don't consciously know how to control. That same energy that creates things like poltergeists. And so if that energy, which is often probably emotional, is fear or anger or something like that, that's how the phenomena what it has to manifest to us.
So we were at a place last night that's attributed to the suicides, right? Were attributed there, and supposedly there's all this negative spirits, ghosts, etc. because these suicides supposedly occur there. So, you know, me, I'm a big, like, check the records guy, and let's see. And I could find no records of any suicides at this place. They're just not there. I mean, if they occurred, they're not in the records. Let's put it that way. And it's the kind of thing where they would be in the paper. It would be very, very unusual for that not to appear in the paper, for there to be suicides in this location and it not be noted anywhere. It would be very, very unusual. So... But people, and indeed, when we were there, kind of experienced some pretty negative stuff. Now, could that be all that energy people put into it? Just the idea of that?
Yeah.
For years and years and years, that you know, that's what people put into that area. You know, maybe that's all it is. I don't know.
Or the energy of the place. I mean, some places seem to have more of a negative vibe than others.
Yeah, this definitely has that for sure.
I mean, there are plenty of places I've been in that have a very oppressive vibe, and I don't think it's because people went there expecting it for it to have an oppressive vibe. The graveyard in Ithaca, there's a spot that sometimes feels perfectly fine, and other times it literally feels like there's something staring at you, wanting you to leave. Like you just get this overwhelming feeling of you're not wanted here.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is also right by running water, too, in the middle of a graveyard.
Right.
So that spot in particular, you know, this is an area that is said to be a power spot. what did they say? Third most powerful spot on the planet, according to there's an Eastern temple. I forget the name of it. Like a block away. You know, there's running water going through this graveyard that's from like the 1700s. It's one of the earliest graveyards in the area, probably built on a sacred spot. And, you know, you have this oppression there occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
As well as lights and shadows and all kinds of other stuff.
Always lights.
Yeah, lights are the most common. The most common thing you will see there is lights.
I mean, across the board with paranormal phenomena.
Yeah. Well, I'll bring people up there, and, you know, I'll notice the lights, and I won't say anything because they're very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
But they're literally like different colored, primary colored lights, small ones moving through the graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in an area where there's any other lights. And eventually they'll say something like, what are these lights I keep seeing?
Well, that was so the last time we went to Site 7, I took John, who is, you know, he calls himself a ecological skeptic or something. He's always looking for natural explanations for the weirdness I'm encountering or feel I'm encountering in the woods, and I'm not mad about that. These are you know, I said, like, I'm glad my wife's a skeptic. This is very valuable to have skeptics in your life.
Yeah,
open-minded skeptics. You know, not the capital S skeptic who's
right.
Like, oh, it's all bunk. But open-minded skeptics are very valuable to have. So I don't mind this at all, and I was very eager to take John there, and it took a while. It usually takes a while, so you have to stand around for a while. And he's like, I don't know, I think I'm seeing something. And Chad was with us, and Chad knows what to look for, and he's like there they are. And John's like, I don't see him, And sometimes it takes, like I said, it takes a minute. But I told John, I was like, you're not going to question it. When you see it, it's not going to be the kind of thing like, oh, is that it? You know, am I really seeing something? I was like, you will know when you see it. And I was very happy he did after all get to see him, and he was pretty amazed because he couldn't explain it, and kind of left the area with a big old smile on his face because he's like, wow, you know, I don't know what that was. And
yet every time I'm with you, there's no lights. Although there was that rock that pinged off your car the one time.
Yeah. We definitely had that coyote came real close to us.
Yes.
Talk about your he came right up on us and yelped, gave that warning thing they do. Scared the pants off him.
And you let out a string of obscenities.
In my defense, that was a few months after the raccoon. I was a little on edge about that.
Yeah, and it had been dead quiet for like an hour.
Yeah,
and then this really loud yelp comes out.
Now
we also had
in March, right?
What was that? I don't remember when it was.
I think it was March because I think you came in March and then Josh came in April and you came back down.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. You know, February is the time where I always go and they're dependably there. They should be there in March. But I was talking to a guy in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh area, who sees these, from his description, very, very similar lights right across the street from his house. So he's out all night long, can see these things all night long, and they behave in the same way. But he said, like, there's certain times they're just not there. And he said for him it's like December, like mid-December through mid-January or something like that. I forget the actual, time, but it's a good chunk of time. And he said they're just not there. He said, I thought they were gone. I thought they were gone and not coming back. And they just weren't there. So that does happen out there at Site 7. And I don't know whether we just hit it at that time or what. But to me, the feeling of it was very different too. It felt dead and drained out there.
Right. We did hear that weird plane.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I heard the plane. You didn't, which made it even weirder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it was really audible on the recording.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It sounds weird there anyway. That there's like, you're on top of, technically that's a mountain. We're on top of there. It's really a large hill, but it's technically a mountain. And just sound just comes up that mountain. It's like the train from across the river sounds like it's sometimes like it's right there in the woods, like 10 feet away in the woods. It's all the way across the river, you know, a good, I don't know, I guess a mile and a half away. It sound, you know, so sound is different there. It's weird. It's funneled. I mean, I think it's a natural thing. I don't think it's a supernatural thing with the sound. It's just naturally funneled in a weird way.
Well, I think that was my suggestion, but then we realized if it was funneling a plane, that sound went on for like, what, 15 minutes?
Yeah, that was a really weird thing. 'Cause, you know, it was too long. Like it should have like it had a Doppler effect kind of thing, come and went.
Yeah. I've heard a train here, and there's no trains nearby. And honestly, I have to admit, the first thing I thought when I heard it was, I think the first time I heard it was after my dad had passed away, and he was big into model trains. And I had come up to my back door, and I went to unlock it, and I heard a train. And I'm like, why am I hearing a train? Like, there's no trains here anywhere. And so I went in, and it went away, and I went inside, and I looked up. I'm like, is there a train I'm not aware of? The nearest train is across the lake on the other side. Like, I'm near the top of the hill. So if you continue over the top of the hill and then go all the way down to the lake and then to the other side of the lake, there's a train track there. And I'm like, did the sound travel like 30 miles? Was it conditions just right that it like bounced that like off the lake and up over the hill? And I mean,
sound does come across water pretty well.
Well, that's it. I've heard it a total of maybe 3 times ever.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you know, trains aren't going to be running all the time either. So maybe the sound exists a lot more, but I'm just not in the right place to hear it. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's the thing with something like that, though. You can't really. It's hard to determine a source. I mean, I could tell you it was a train sound, no doubt. There was no mistaking it. But where or why I was hearing it, I don't know.
Well, it was obviously Bigfoot driving a ghost train.
Duh.
Actually, in Volume 2, I do have this pretty funny, amazing account of Bigfoot train hopping.
Huh.
It's the guy who somebody told him Bigfoot was riding trains. This Bigfoot researcher, he thought the guy was crazy. He goes out to meet this guy in the woods by these train tracks, and at some point during the day, this train goes by, and he's watching. He's like, "I'm telling you, there's something big and hairy was sitting on this damn train, had its head down." He said, "I couldn't see its face because it had its head down, but it was like riding on this train." Great account. I think that was Stan Courtney. I think it was his account.
Huh. It seems like there was something else I was going to mention about Site 7. I mean, it's really too bad that Sites 1 through 6 exploded.
Yeah, the Illuminati was done with them, and
I see.
Just made them disappear.
Now there was something about lights. See, when I was there, that stone hit your truck. You know, like that's not enough weirdness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's just that one thing. I don't know how a stone would hit your truck anyway. You know, short of being thrown or being like if a car had gone by and kicked it up off the ground.
Right.
But at the same time, it's not enough for me to say that that's not something that could have occurred naturally with an absence of any other weirdness, you know? Right.
Well, and the sad and frustrating thing is you did get to see the lights very, very briefly.
Yeah.
They like flashed on. You were just like, it wasn't, and I get it. It's not enough. You know, it's not enough.
They were like little quick streaks.
Yeah. So what we had done last time is it's a long hike. It's a kind of a brutal hike, but we came in from the riverside and went all the way up that mountain and stood in the woods, where basically where we thought we were seeing the lights. And boy, did we get a show there. Now,
really?
I thought things were going to be a lot scarier there. I don't know. We had 4 people. One of them was a woman. I don't know if it's because of the different energy, but it was a very playful feeling. It was very, very positive, very, very, just kind of almost fun, positive night, with these lights. Again, John was a total skeptic, and he saw plenty of them, and they came right up to us. Like at one point he was kneeling, he dropped to his knees and tried to grab one. That's how close they were.
Do they go on and off?
What's that?
Do they go on and off?
They do.
Okay.
They do. And oddly enough, like when they're off in the woods, they seem to be, I would guess softball size or bigger. Sometimes even maybe larger than that. Maybe beach ball size, although maybe soccer ball size sometimes. But when they came up to us, they were ping pong ball size at biggest. And there was one time, and you talk about perception, there was one time where John said he saw a ping pong ball size light. I was looking at the same light because it was in the same place. I only saw what looked to me like a pin light, like just like one single LED. That's what it looked like to me. And he was seeing something the size of a ping pong ball. So
were you seeing it from the same angle?
We were not. I was off to his side. So does that make a difference? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because other times we would agree. We would agree, like, oh yeah, that's ping pong ball size or quarter sized or whatever.
Yeah.
But this one time, and I remember thinking like, that's not what I'm seeing at all. But if that's perception or angle, I don't know.
Interesting. Still want to see these when I'm there.
Yeah. Well, I have this standing invite from that guy in Pittsburgh because I want to see if what he's seeing is the same thing I'm seeing. So he said he's invited me to come out to his place and see him, and I've invited him to come here and see him because I'm very curious to see. The combinations of people are interesting with this stuff.
Yes.
Like, so the second time we were there with Josh fully will say, I'm paranormal. What's he call himself? Paranormal. Whatever. Anyway, he basically says paranormal stuff doesn't happen around him because he kills it. Maybe, because it did feel sapped. It really, really felt sapped.
Yeah.
And he wanted like the devil to just go out everywhere with me. Like he wanted to go to Hex Hollow at night and all this stuff, and it's just like I was tired. We were coming home from Rhode Island. I was too tired to do it, but he wanted to go out that night. I was like, nah, man, I can't. It's not a good idea. But anyway, if you approach it with the idea that you are not going to see anything, that you are kryptonite, that's because it's a paranormal kryptonite, that you are a paranormal kryptonite, does that, in a sense, feed into it or drain out of it, in other words?
Yeah. Well, I know, like with the graveyard in Ithaca, it takes a while sometimes. You got to kind of just sit there and be patient. And there's one spot in particular I've noticed, which is above the spot where you feel the oppression. It's this big circle of trees with one tombstone and one huge monument in the middle. And if you stay there for a little bit, usually across where the stream and stuff is, on the other side is where you'll start seeing the lights most of the time. And sometimes you'll see shadows moving around the outside of this circle of trees. And when I brought Roshan up there the first time at night, he's live streaming from it, and he's like, I don't see anything. And I'm like, you need to like just quiet. You're too loud. You got to stop and just wait. I don't think the stuff responds well when you're making a ton of noise.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I don't get where people are hooting and hollering and banging on trees, and sometimes I guess they get responses.
Sure.
But we've had much more of just go out in the woods and be quiet and be there.
Yeah. The one time me and my one ex were walking along, and I've told the story a while ago. We were walking through that graveyard in Ithaca, and we were going to meet some other people, and we were walking with another friend of ours, and we literally got surrounded by those lights. Like they were swarming around us like insects. They were about the size of insects, and they were all multicolored. And she looks at me and she goes, "Are you seeing this?" Because it was astounding, like it was way beyond the any kind of subtlety. They were very obvious. And I'm like, yep. And I looked to my other friend and I said, "Are you seeing this?" And he's like, "Seeing what?" And I said, "The lights." He's like, "What lights?" And it's like, okay, well, the two of us are definitely seeing it. Why are you not? And then when we got close to where our other friends were, we heard one of them say, call out to us, and the lights literally just shot off into away from us. Never had anything like that happen since. But it's just...
Well, that's the other thing. So they kind of act the same, but they kind of act different every time we're there.
Yeah.
I know where to look for them. I know where they're going to appear, but how they're going to act, sometimes we've seen them look like best way I can explain it is somebody juggling flashlights if you couldn't see where the actual
beam
source of the beam was. You know what I mean? So you couldn't see the actual flashlight, just the beam. It looked like that, like somebody juggling flashlights. It was that kind of fast and extreme and bizarre and kind of other times they're very subtle and they move but not very much and it's weird but the last time when they were around you, did you get the impression that so we got the impression they were almost curious when they were coming up to us. That's kind of what we all agreed on.
Well, I think when that happened, I think my girlfriend and I at the time felt that something was interacting with us.
Mm-hmm.
Like something was playing, being playful.
Right.
There was something else. Oh, when you mentioned juggling flashlights, I mean, that makes me think of the sparkler thing I saw in my driveway, where I had pulled into my driveway one night, and I have it in my notes somewhere, but I pulled into my driveway, and I can't remember if that's when my dad might have had it closed off with pylons because it was too muddy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have to get out, move the pylons, and get back in, and then pull the car through and then put the pylons out because he didn't want customers to his hobby shop pulling in and getting stuck in the mud. Right. So I think this was that time period. And I pulled into the driveway and I get in the car and on the right side of the driveway, I just see all these lights sort of start up and they literally look like a tumbleweed of sparklers. And they rolled like a tumbleweed from left to right across the driveway, got to the other side, and then just dismissed and went out. And again, never saw anything like that.
Right.
And at the time, I just went, well, that was something. And again, lights on the property again was we had gotten back from an Overkill show, me and my friend Dave, and we're sitting in the car for a moment. The car's off, and we hear a yell that just went on for 10 seconds and then stopped with without any decay or fade or anything like that. It was just that, but it sounded like someone yelling. And then we get out of the car and I start walking toward the house and I'm under this huge tree and I see red, green, and blue lights, almost like from a kaleidoscope on the ground. And again, there's no sense really to make of this stuff.
Yeah, the only thing we can say about lights is they appear across the board with all this phenomena.
Right.
No matter what it is, you get not all the time, but often you get lights with ghosts, you get lights with UFOs, you get lights with Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was one of my initial statements was when I was starting to look at this stuff comparatively was if you see a light in the sky, it's an alien, but if you see a light in a house, it's a ghost.
And in the woods, it's Bigfoot.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's before I realized that Bigfoot was so associated with lights too.
Mm-hmm.
So something that used to happen to me years ago that doesn't anymore is usually around springtime, I would see small shadows race out into the road or around me when I was walking out at night. And they were darker than dark shadows. And I started to associate them with nature spirits because it would always be in the spring. And they weren't animals. They were a very distinct thing. And I don't see them anymore. And I don't know if maybe it's because I don't spend as much time in nature or my perception has changed or whatever that was isn't communicating like that anymore. But I would see it regularly enough to note what time of year it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also had an experience where I was actually arguing with this girl I knew outside her house. Not a serious argument. It was just I forget what it was. It was something stupid. And all of a sudden, these things just started running by us. And she finished whatever she was saying, and then she just stopped and went, "Did you just see that?" And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Shadows just ran by us like little animals." And I'm like, "Yep, saw it." But I think that's the only time I had confirmation of somebody else being there when I saw it. But again, the fact that it only happened in spring, you know, like why the timing? Was it trying to convince me it was a nature spirit? Was it something waking up because it's spring? Is it symbolic of something? Is it me interpreting that way because it's spring?
I have no answers.
No, neither do I. Just weird experiences.
Right.
And like I said, that's one that I got validated because it happened with someone else and someone else who didn't know I had that experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, those are the best. Chad actually found an old book of folklore that mentions the area of Site 7.
Oh, really?
And yeah. Oh, yeah. And story after story of weird lights. People seeing. So there were houses back there that were, I guess at this time they were abandoned. And the people were talking about seeing blue lights in these houses.
Huh.
And so it's, weird light phenomenon has been associated with the area and in general, like it was a weird place to go, I guess,
Now, you said you had a magnetic map of the area.
Mm-hmm.
Does Site 7, is it more magnetic? Is there an anomaly there?
There are magnetic anomalies at Site 7. There's a magnetic anomaly that literally follows Toad Road to the river. There's a huge magnetic anomaly that dips down from the Tuscarora State Forest where Pandemonium is, follows the South Mountain chain down almost all the way through Michaud Forest. And there's another magnetic anomaly that's just blopped right over Hex Hollow. So all of these places I talk about have magnetic anomalies associated with them.
Do you have?
And this is something a listener of my podcast sent me. I didn't come up with this and think he sent me here's a magnetic anomaly map. You might be interested in this. And I looked at it was most of South Central Pennsylvania, I think, and part of Maryland. And sure enough, all of these places had magnetic anomalies associated with them.
Were there any areas that were where there were lots of experiences that didn't have anomalies?
I mean, as far as the places that I've been, I'm sure there were little blips of haunted houses.
Oh, sure. Okay. But I mean, bigger areas.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking, okay, maybe Chickies Rock, I think, didn't have that. So that's okay. The area, across the river where the Albert Witch is, and there's a bunch of ghost stories there,
right,
and so forth. I don't think that did, but I'd have to recheck to be sure.
I mean, it feels like what we're doing is collecting a puzzle piece for a puzzle we don't know how many pieces there are to.
1,000%. 1,000%. And this is the kind of information that I think is valuable, but I also don't think I'm necessarily the guy to do anything with it. I'm way more the guy to just put me out there and let me add my own experiences to everyone else's, and I'll tell you what I feel and what I think. Well, I think it's super interesting, and it's that magnetic anomaly information is going to be very valuable to somebody who knows what to do with it. But other than saying it's there, I don't know where to go from there with it.
Interesting.
And frankly, if I had to look at the phenomenon through that scope and that scope alone, what's the geology like, and are there magnetic anomalies, and what are the weather patterns? I would be bored to tears. Honestly, it's just not the way I want to approach it. Sure.
All right. Well, that seems like a good place to end it. So thank you for sticking around, Tim.
Sure thing. No problem.
You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.